Hello, folk. Today I'm going to talk to you about motivation selection of artificial intelligence. The goal of motivation selection approach is to influence the superintelligence's desires in order to avert unwanted results. And these strategies would create a superintelligence that wouldn't desire to harmfully exploit a decisive strategic advantage by engineering the agent's motivational system and its ultimate aims. A superintelligent agent would tend not to do harm if it preferred not to, say, in some reasonable understanding of harm. This is because superintelligent agents are adept at attaining their goals. On the other hand, motivation selection can involve explicitly formulating a goal or a set of rules to be followed. We call it direct specification, or setting up the system so that it can discover and appropriate set of values for itself by reference to some implicitly or indirectly formulated criterion, and we call this indirect normativity. And one option in motivation selection is to try to build a system so that it will have modest, non-ambitious goals, and we will call this domesticity. And an alternative to creating a motivation system from scratch is to select an agent that already has an acceptable motivation system and then augment that agent's cognitive powers to make it super intelligent, while ensuring that the motivation system doesn't get corrupted in the process, which we will call this augmentation. Now let us look at this all together. The most straightforward way to tackle the control problem is through the method called direct specification. This approach has two variations: rule-based and consequentialist. The main idea is here to explicitly establish a set of rules or values that will ensure a super intelligent AI behaves safely and for the greater good, even if it has unrestricted freedom. However, direct specification encounters significant challenges that may be impossible to overcome. And these challenges arise from two main sources. Firstly, determining the specific rules or values that should guide the AI is a complex task. And secondly, translating these rules or values into computer-readable code is also difficult. And these obstacles make the direct specification approach problematic and uncertain in its effectiveness. And the traditional illustration of the direct rule-based approach is the three laws of robotics concept, formulated by science fiction author Isaac Asimov in a short story published in 1942. The three laws were: the first one was a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. Second one, a robot must obey any orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And the third and last one, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection doesn't conflict with the first or second law. And embarrassingly for our species, Asimov's laws remain in state of the art for over half a century, and this despite obvious problems with the approach, some of which are explored in Asimov's other writings. On the other hand, Bertrand Russell, who spent many years working on the foundations of mathematics, once remarked that everything is vague to a degree you don't realize till you have tried to make it precise. Russell's dictum applies in space to the direct specification approach. Consider, for example, how one might explicate Asimov's first law. Doesn't mean that the robots should minimize the probability of any human being coming to harm. And in that case, the other laws become obvious, since it's always possible for the AI to take some action that would have at least some microscopic effect on the probability of a human being coming to harm. How is the robot to balance a large risk of a few humans coming to harm versus a small risk of many human being harmed? And how do we define harm anyway in general? How should the harm of physical pain be weighed against the harm of architectural ugliness or social injustice? Is a sadist harmed if he's prevented from tormenting his victim? How do we define human being? There is no consideration given to other morally considerable beings, such as sentient non-human animals and digital minds? About this, the more one ponders, the more the questions proliferate. Perhaps the closest existing analog to a rule set that could govern the actions of a superintelligence operating in the world at large is a legal system. But legal systems themselves have developed through a long process of trial and error, and they regulate relatively slowly changing human societies. Laws can be revised when necessary. And most importantly, legal systems are administered by judges and juries who generally apply a measure of common sense and human decency to ignore logically possible legal interpretations that are sufficiently obviously unwanted and unintended by the lawgivers. It's probably humanly impossible to explicitly formulate a highly complex set of detailed rules, have them apply across a highly diverse set of circumstances, and get it right on the first implementation. Problems for the direct consequentialist approach are similar to those for the direct rule-based approach. This is true even if the AI is intended to serve some apparently simple purpose, such as implementing a version of classical utilitarianism. For example, the goal maximize the expectation of the balance of pleasure over pain in the world may appear simple, yet expressing it in computer code would involve, among other things, specifying how to recognize pleasure and pain. And doing this reliably might require solving an array of persistent problems in the philosophy of mind, even just to obtain a correct account expressed in a natural language. An account which will then somehow have to be translated into a programming language. And a small error here in either the philosophical account or its translation into code could have catastrophic consequences. For example, consider an AI that has hedonism as its final goal, and which would therefore like to tile the universe with hedonium. It's first seem ridiculous, but to this end, the AI might produce computernium and use it to implement digital minds in a state of euphoria. In order to maximize efficiency, the AI omits from the implementation any mental faculties that are not essential for the experience of pleasure, and exploits any computational shortcuts that, according to its definition of pleasure, do not vitiate the generation of pleasure. For instance, say the AI might confine its simulation to reward circuitry, eliding faculties such as memory, sensory perception, executive function, and language. It might simulate minds at a relatively coarse-grained level of functionality, omitting lower-level neuronal processes. It might replace commonly repeated computations with calls to a lookup table, or it might put in some place arrangement whereby multiple minds would share most parts of their underlying computational machinery. And such tricks could greatly increase the quantity of pleasure producible with a given amount of resources. And it's unclear how desirable this would be. Furthermore, if the AI's criterion for determining whether a physical process generates pleasure is wrong, then the AI's optimizations might throw the baby out with the bathwater, discarding something which is essential according to the AI's criterion, yet essential according to the criteria implicit in our human values. And the universe then gets filled not with exultingly having hedonium, but with computational processes that are unconscious and completely worthless. The equivalent of a smiley face sticker xeroxed trillions upon trillions of times and plastered across the galaxies. The aim of self-limitation is a special kind of final goal that might be more susceptible to direct formulation than the examples provided by me already. Also, it would seem impossible to specify how one would want a superintelligence to behave in the world as a whole, since this would require us to take into account all the trade-offs in all the scenarios that could occur. It might be possible to specify how a superintelligence should behave in a specific circumstance. And therefore, we could try to persuade the system to limit its actions to small scale, specific context, and a small number of action modes. For example, one could try to design an AI such that it would function as a question answering device, simply giving the AI the final goal of producing maximally accurate answers to any kind of question posed to it would be unsafe. Recall the Riemann hypothesis catastrophe, which I described in my video 8. To achieve domesticity, one might try to define a final goal that would somehow overcome these difficulties, like perhaps a goal that combined to the desiderate of answering questions correctly and minimizing the AI's impact on the world, except whatever impact result as an incidental consequences of giving accurate and non-manipulative answers to the questions it is asked. And the direct specification of such a domesticity goal is more likely to be feasible than the direct specification of either a more ambitious goal or a complete rule set for operating in an open-ended range of situations. And significant challenges nonetheless remain. Care will have to be taken, for example, in the definition of what it would be for the AI to minimize its impact on the world, to ensure that the measure of the AI's impact coincides with our own standards for what counts as a large or small impact. A bad measure would lead to bad trade-offs. There are also other kinds of risk associated with building an oracle, which I will discuss later in the next video. And there is a natural fit between the domesticity approach and the physical containment. One would try to box an AI such that the system is unable to escape while simultaneously trying to shape the AI's motivation system such that it will be unwilling to escape even if it found a way to do so. Other things equal, the existence of multiple independent safety mechanisms should shorten the odds of success. If direct specification seems hopeless, we might instead try indirect normativity. The basic idea is that rather than specifying a concrete normative standard directly, we specify a process for deriving a standard. We then build a system so that it's motivated to carry out this process and to adopt whatever standard the process arrives at. For example, the process could be to carry out an investigation into the empirical question of what some suitable idealized version of us would prefer the AI to do. And the final goal given to the AI in this example could be something along the lines of, say, achieve that which we would have wished the AI to achieve if we had thought about the matter long and hard. And further explanation of indirect normativity will have to wait for my later videos. There, I will revisit the idea of extrapolating our volition and explore various alternative formulations. Indirect normativity is a very important approach to motivation selection. Its promise lies in the fact that it could let us offload to the superintelligence much of the difficult cognitive work required to carry out a direct specification of an appropriate final goal. Augmentation is the final approach of incentive selection in our list. Instead, then attempting to create a motivation system from scratch, in this case, the aim is to start with a system that already has a workable incentive system and then improve its cognitive capabilities to make it super intelligent. If everything goes according to plan, we will have a superintelligence with a respectable motivational system. And this approach obviously is unavailing in the case of a newly created seed AI. But augmentation is a potential motivation selection method for other paths to superintelligence, including brain emulation, biological enhancement, brain-computer interfaces, and networks and organizations where there is a possibility of building out the system from a normative nucleus that is regular human beings that already contains a representation of human value. And the attractiveness of augmentation may increase in proportion to our despair at the other approach to the control problem. And creating a motivation system for a seed AI that remains reliably safe and beneficial under recursive self-improvement, even as the system grows into a mature superintelligence, is a tall order, especially if we must get the solution right on the first attempt. And with augmentation, we will at least start with a system that has familiar and human-like motivations. On the downside, it might be hard to ensure that a complex, evolved, kludgy, and poorly understood motivation system like that of a human being will not get corrupted when its cognitive engine blasts into the stratosphere. As discussed earlier, an imperfect brain emulation procedure that preserves intellectual functioning may not preserve all facets of personality. And the same is true for biological enhancements of cognition, which might subtly affect motivation, and for collective intelligence enhancements of organizations and networks, which might adversely change social dynamics. And if superintelligence is achieved via any of these paths, a project sponsor would find guarantees about the ultimate motivations of the mature system hard to come by. A mathematically well-specified and foundational elegant AI architecture might, for all its non-anthropomorphic otherness, offer greater transparency, perhaps even the prospect that important aspects of its functionality could be formally verified. And in the end, however, one tallies up the advantages and disadvantages of augmentation. The choice as to whether to rely on it might be forced. If superintelligence is first achieved along the artificial intelligence path, augmentation is not applicable. Conversely, if superintelligence is first achieved along some non-AI paths, then many of other motivation selection methods are inapplicable. Even though views on how likely augmentation would be to succeed do have strategic relevance insofar as we have opportunities to influence which technology will first produce superintelligence. A quick synopsis might be called for before we close this video. We distinguish two broad classes of methods for dealing with the agency problem at the heart of AI safety: capability control and motivation selection. And this alignment will give us this summary. Each control method comes with potential vulnerabilities and present different degrees of difficulty in its implementation. It might perhaps be thought that we should rank them from better to worse and then opt for the best method, but that will be simplistic. Some methods can be used in combination, whereas others are exclusive. Even a comparatively insecure method may be advisable if it can easily be used as an adjunct, whereas a strong method might be unattractive if it would preclude the use of other desirable safeguards. It is therefore necessary to consider what package deals are available. We need to consider what type of system we might try to build and which control methods will be applicable to each type. And this will be the topic of my next video. See you there. Bye-bye.